Wait, do you? No. You can't think I come from the National Public Radio.
Don't you?
Sibling a boo, of course not. I'm lore party built. We wouldn't be having this conversation if I'd been produced by National Public Radio. I mean, look at me.
This is audio, so what am I looking at? What would mark you as being made by National Public Radio? Do you have merch? A tote bag, maybe?
Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and, if we're lucky, maybe learn a little bit about ourselves along the way. I'm your host, Opsa, and with me, as always, is the one and only Sibling Abu.
Sibling Abu. Here with some tea.
We've got a great episode queued up for you all. And before we jump into it, just a light bit of housekeeping.
Yes.
Please be aware, we are, of course, finishing out A Psalm for the Wild Built.
Yep.
Spoiler warning, I hope you've all read the entirety of the book, as we will be covering chapters 5 through 8 to wrap up our coverage.
That's right.
As always, we of course encourage you to read along and share your thoughts with us. Email us at sci-fi bookclubpod@loreparty.com. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi bookclubpod. We've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, bloopers, all on that Patreon. And it's, of course, where you can find our Discord, where we love to keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going. And of course, you can find all those links in the show notes, so no need to memorize that last bit of dialogue.
Or frantically write https:// Fuck, I forgot a slash. All right, with housekeeping out of the way, you know the game plan for these book club episodes, folks. We're going to begin today by summarizing the chapters from today's reading. That's 5 through 8. Then we will share our impressions of, at this point, not just these chapters, but the book at large, since we've completed it. And finally, we'll wrap up by diving deeper into our sci-fi analysis and picking apart some takeaways from this book. And of course, this is a book club. So stick around until the end, because we will be sharing some comments and observations from the listeners in our lovely community.
That's right.
Okay, let's take a quick break, Opsa. Dear listener, don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're finishing out this book.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Lowe's knows that free is just better. That's why MyLowe's Rewards is free to join. As a member, you earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases, get exclusive free gifts, and earn free shipping at Silver Key status, all on top of weekly member-only deals. Don't wait. Join MyLowe's Rewards for free today and start saving more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
All right, welcome back, listeners. Let's start with a brief summary of the reading for today.
Yes.
So we begin with chapter 5, where Dex is frantically trying to plug a leak in the freshwater tank of their tea cart as Moscap tries to figure out how he can help.
That's right.
Of course, a lot of water was lost in the process, so Moscap grabs the heavy tank easily in its robotic arms and offers to go down to the nearby creek and refill it, but Dex feels a little icky accepting help from a robot. Dex does eventually accept Moscap's assistance, but once at the creek, they suddenly feel unsure about taking water from the dirty algae-filled creek. Some instinct is warning them that it might not be safe.
Tell me you've never gone camping or been on the Netflix show Alone without telling me you've never gone camping or been on the Netflix show Alone.
Yeah, exactly. Moscap somehow understands, and it takes Dex to a dilapidated factory nearby to illustrate the concept of remnants. The innate impressions, fleeting feelings, and unspoken instincts the robot has inherited from all its recycled parts.
Wow, I found this incredibly fascinating because then this leads to a philosophical conversation between the two about why robots who could theoretically repair themselves indefinitely, right? They could live forever if they chose to. They are just pieces and parts and circuitry. Why the founding robots, the originals who left 200 years ago, would instead choose to die, quote unquote, and pass on their parts to future generations of robots.
It's quite fascinating.
It's interesting. And Moscap explains, quote, "How could we continue to be students of the world if we don't emulate its most intrinsic cycle? If the originals had simply fixed themselves, they'd be behaving in opposition to the very thing they desperately sought to understand. The thing we're still trying to understand." End quote.
Wow. So interesting.
Oh my God. Wow. I mean, life, right? The robots are imitating life and they want to now understand life now that they've gained consciousness.
Yeah. And a natural part of the cycle of life is death.
It is being afraid of death.
Yeah, and it's something that Moscap admits it and all other robots do feel. They do have fear of death like all living things.
Right.
And at that point, Dex explains the wind paradox and the paradoxical balance of nature and the tension between life and death in this fascinating way.
Right. So then chapter 5 wraps up as Moscap and Dex discuss how they both actually have a choice in this. They are both smarter than their remnants, than their instincts, and they can choose to act against them. They have evolved to that point in their nature in a way that maybe an ant doesn't have the choice to not follow its instincts, its DNA. Moscap and Dex do. And that's a pretty empowering thought. And I think it's something that's enlightening for both of them in this moment.
Well, we move on in chapter 6 to watching Dex prepare dinner as Moscap is also watching in great fascination. It's quite a great scene. Moscap offers to help cook, and Dex does accept, instructing the robot on how to prepare the onions.
Yeah.
Through the cooking process, we learn a little bit about how human and robot cultures treat nature, like how Dex doesn't eat meat unless they kill it themselves. And how Moscap, on the other hand, can't exactly muster up the courage to harvest some wild thyme.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. When they sit down to eat, Dex explains further how just uncomfortable it is that they're unable to share a meal with the robot. Something that's so intrinsic to their identity, sense of self, and culture. Sharing food is fundamental.
Yeah.
Quote, "I'd find it rude if I went to anyone's home and wasn't offered food."
Same.
To remedy. Accurate.
Don't invite me over if you're not ready to feed me.
We're going to split that Chipotle, okay? Well, to remedy this, Dex comes up with a creative solution and makes Moscap a plate of food. And when they're done with their plate, they happily eat Moscap's as well, as of course the robot cannot eat food. And that gives them a feeling of contentness with the feeling, or with the sense that a meal has in fact been shared.
Yeah.
And Moscap plays along, which is honestly just really cute.
It was really cute. Yeah. Moscap is like, okay, if this makes you feel better about eating, sure, I'll pretend to have a meal with you. I thought it was a really cute moment. Shows some of the camaraderie that these two have built up on this little journey. Okay, moving on to chapter 7, our intrepid travelers They find themselves at an impasse, quite
no.
literally. A landslide has
Right.
completely blocked the road
Oh,
to the
no.
Hermitage, making it impossible for them to continue this journey on Oxbike. So, Dex, emboldened and a little bit desperate, decides to leave the bike and the tea cart and everything behind and power through on foot. I'm just climbing over this landslide. And Mosscap obviously tags along, but is like asking Dex, why? Why is this so important to you? Why are you so desperate to get to the Hermitage? What is there for you? What do you think
What's
you're going to
wrong?
find? What's wrong?
Yeah.
And Dex, obviously avoiding many of these questions, is getting more and more upset that they have to face them. After an uncomfortable fall from the landslide at one point, it begins to rain. Dex is beat up. They're at the verge of tears at this point, and the two decide to camp out for the night in this uncomfortable, dirty cave
Right.
to wait out a rainstorm. And this is where Dex is finally able to voice that they don't know why they feel so unhappy. And that not knowing scares them. Quote,
Right.
what is wrong with me that I can have everything I could ever want and have ever asked for and still wake up in the morning feeling like every day is a slog? End quote.
Yeah.
Mosscap replies with an unhelpful, well, I don't know how you feel that way, which is fair. Obviously Dex doesn't know, Mosscap doesn't know, but this opens up an insecurity for the robot as well. Because then Mosscap shares that it's been thinking about how maybe it wasn't the right choice for this mission.
Right.
If Mosscap isn't able to help Dex here on this journey, just one human figure out one human's needs, how the hell is it supposed to figure out all of humanity's needs?
Right.
And the robot kind of opens up its own insecurities as well.
Yeah.
Both of them clearly at a low point here. They decide to cuddle up and hold hands in this cold, icky cave. Not so much for warmth, but honestly more for comfort and coziness and to support each other as darkness falls and Dex falls into a fitful sleep.
That's right. Well, we find ourselves in Chapter 8, following Dex and Mosscap as they finally arrive at the Hartsboro Hermitage, and they begin to explore.
Yeah.
And they're totally astounded by what they find. Despite being slightly decayed, maybe quite decayed, they they can see a hint of its former beauty and the many subtle and not so subtle references to the gods.
Yeah.
They find in one room in particular, it's quite cozy, marked with a summer bear dedicated to Dex's god, Alalay.
Yep.
A tea mug that makes Dex recall a really happy memory with their father that, in fact, inspired them to become a monk.
Mm-hmm.
They think back to the moment when the first monk they encountered treated them like a full human.
Right.
And that recognition of their humanity, even at such a young age, really encouraged them and gave them a little sense of place. And of course, naturally, after some years, they themselves became a monk.
Right. It really set them on a life path from that moment on.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, speaking of life paths, this leads to a discussion here at the end of the book about finding meaning in one's life. And Dex admits that they're not fulfilled with the path that they've chosen to become a monk, to become a tea monk. Quote, what am I supposed to do if not this? What am I if not this? End quote. This is all they know how to do.
It's a question that many of us can relate to.
Absolutely. These are feelings I have caught myself in many times throughout life. This isn't like it happens to you once and you get over it sort of thing. Like this is a feeling that many of us can suddenly find ourselves at any point in life.
And it's certainly not the case that it's quite so easy to change professions as it Appears to be, at least in the world on Panga.
Yeah, for real. I can't just drop my job and decide to be a T-Monk.
And just be given an ox bike? I'm not
What?
getting ox bikes.
What leftist socialist utopian state is this where everyone gets free ox bikes? Get the fuck out of here.
Right.
Well, I found this really interesting, and there's a lot to say about this, but Moscap responds based on its own experiences and observations as a robot, right? Not through the lens of being human in human society, but through the lens of a robot out here in the wilderness, a wild-built robot.
Right.
And Moscap gets into basically like the futility of determining your own happiness with life with having a purpose. Do you need a purpose to be happy? Quote, "You keep asking why your work is not enough, and I don't know how to answer that because it is enough to exist in the world and marvel at it. You don't need to justify that or earn it. You are allowed to just live. That is all most animals do." End quote. This got me in the feels.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is the passage of the book. I think that really captures the spirit of their journey.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, Dex is not fully convinced by this, right? Like you and me might be floored by this quote.
Yeah.
Dex still continues to be a bit skeptical and pushes back. Dex argues, well, I'm not just an animal. I'm a human being. I'm not out here to just eat, sleep, and survive. I have desires beyond those things and ambitions beyond those things. And they're afraid that this is it. You know, this is the one life they've been given. And if they can't pursue those desires and ambitions and dreams and goals, are they wasting their life? What will it all mean if they are unable to find purpose and achieve purpose in the one magical, beautiful life they've been given?
Right.
And I found Moscap's response quite beautiful and poetic. Quote, "That's true for all life I've observed. Why would it bother me? Do you not find consciousness alone to be the most exhilarating thing?"
Right.
End quote.
Yeah.
Moscap, like, I'm not bothered by meaninglessness. I don't need my robot life to have any meaning. And I think that's such a beautiful outlook because only a robot who is the ancestor of robots who obtained consciousness could see consciousness as a gift.
Right.
Something that humans kind of take for granted, I guess, you know?
Right. Yeah. I really like what Moscap says after, quote, "Because I know that no matter what, I'm wonderful." And I just found that to be such a, I mean, even Dex didn't know what to say. I mean,
Yeah.
Sure, they were exhausted, but just that simple recognition of self-worth is certainly a
Yes.
message that I can tell Dex needed to hear, even if they weren't necessarily ready to really take it in.
Yeah.
Well, after this quite deep conversation,
Yeah.
Dex naturally falls immediately asleep, and Moscap
Same.
continues to explore the ruins. When they awaken, Dex finds that Moscap has prepared a tea ceremony for them and
Oh.
did what they needed to. It read books that were lying around and relied on what it learned during its journey with Dex.
Yeah.
And it's the first time in countless years since Dex has found himself on the receiving end of this comforting tea ceremony.
Oh.
And they gratefully sip the gross time brew.
So cute, so funny.
Joyfully. And Dex, at this point, voices their feelings of unhappiness and accepts that, for now, they may have no clue what to do next or what will fulfill them. But in the end, they decide to continue the journey with Moscap through human territory and to help it on its mission.
Hell yeah.
Much to Moscap and clearly Abu's
Oh,
delight.
clearly my delight. Oh,
Really
So
what a sweet
cute.
ending.
what a sweet, heartfelt, and touching ending to this book, to this little, precious little book.
And as we'll recall, I think it also wraps with, in the background, the sound of crickets.
The sound of crickets. Yeah, that's right.
At long
Those are the final things we hear at the end of this book. Wow. Okay, so that's a song for the wild build, Opsa. I think it's quite clear how I feel about it. I'm like tearing up over here, but I want to toss it to you first. What did you think of this book? Not only these chapters from today's reading, but the book at large.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I am in agreement with you that this is such a really lovely, wonderful second half of the book and entirety of a book.
Yeah.
Dex continues to be, this lost soul that we have all been raging against the universe, but really just trying to find their way. And Moscap shines, and by the end, you're no longer sure which of them is the monk.
Yeah.
As Moscap is just so wise and is really coming from a place of kind of mature understanding of what it is to be a being in this universe.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, as a reader, I just found myself really moved by several passages throughout these chapters. And we've spoken to a handful of them, but overall, yeah, really, really satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a few minor criticisms, perhaps, or some minor dissatisfaction. But before I get to that, I want to hear how you felt about this, Sabu.
That was ominous. That was like, before I break your heart, Abu, I'll let you gush. No, I skimmed your criticisms here in the script, and I don't disagree with them.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
sure. I'll share my my feelings about this book, which I think are quite clear by how much I'm gushing about it. I just loved this precious little book. I cried reading the book. I cried rereading it. I cried while I was scripting this conversation today and rereading passages again. And honestly, like, I'll probably get a little teary today, like in this recording. Yeah. Like this book meant a lot to me, and I loved it so much. And I don't think my final rating later at the end of the episode is going to surprise anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. There are these just like touching moments of really beautiful writing and passages that really resonated with me. I think the book gets into some really lovely ideas, really big ideas for such a small book, tackling quite heavy topics.
Yeah.
And I found that really satisfying because as much as, we're both avid sci-fi readers. And as much as I love a big, dense sci-fi book that leans into its big ideas and its big bombastic moments, time travel, colonizing other planets, alien invasion.
Yes.
It makes me think of like Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which you had recommended to me. That book made me cry, but that was a huge book that spanned thousands of years.
Right.
A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, a very political book without spoiling anything, just like huge moments in the story. Or even just the books that we've covered on this show, right? Ancillary Justice, Three Body Problem. Those are like big sci-fi books with big moments and big ideas and big characters and big universes and big world building, hard science. This is a small book, right? This is a small book that takes us on a small adventure over a small moment of time.
Right.
But I think that doesn't mean that the ideas were small. I think it manages to tackle themes that are just as big as important as anything Three Body tackled or Children of Time tackled. There's a couple I want to call out in particular. For example, I loved this observation about the Hermitage when Dex and Moscap arrive, which touches on climate change. Quote, "On the one hand, sustainable dwellings like this were the progenitors of the buildings people lived in now. And it was important to remember that such places had existed pre-transition. Not everything in the factory age burned oil. There had been those who had seen the writing on the wall, who had made places such as this to serve as example of what could be. But these were merely islands in a toxic sea. The good intentions of a few individuals had not been enough, could never have been enough to upend a paradigm entirely. What the world had needed in the end was to change everything. They had narrowly averted disaster thanks to a catalyst no one could have predicted." End quote. And the catalyst, presumably, I think it's hinting at robot consciousness.
Totally.
That is like a beautiful statement on the climate crisis, right?
Absolutely.
And this idea that there are people who see the writing on the wall. There are people ringing the alarm bells right now. But it's going to take massive change. It's going to take a paradigm shift. It's going to take us uprooting what we do and how we do those things. Surface level stuff is not going to be enough to avert crisis. And the humans in this story clearly went through a very similar situation that we are in the real world, facing climate change. And I thought this was just a beautiful passage that really touched on that idea and had something to say about it too. You know,
Totally.
I've seen some criticism online that this book and the next one is only really good at asking questions, but fails to answer any. I would disagree. This to me feels like an answer to the climate crisis question.
Totally. Even the criticism of the factory age buildings, which, you know, are the buildings that we have around us today, and the fact that they don't have any ecological utility when they're no longer used for, you know, however they're being used today. In the book, they're composed of, I think it was like mycelium tissue and
right.
Other organic matter.
Sci-fi this, sci-fi that.
Exactly. But that did have, you know, it was essentially biodegradable. And so could eventually be, you know, subsumed by nature quite organically.
Right. I also wanted to touch on another quote that like genuinely made me tear up. This is more personal to me, but I think still touches on a really beautiful idea in this book. There's like a single line here when Moscap asks Dex whether their family has kicked them out. Is that the reason we're going to this hermitage?
Right.
And this single line, this single response that Dex has, I think says so much about love and family and acceptance. Especially, I think, given the context that Dex is obviously a non-binary character. Quote, I love them. They love me. I never really fit there. We don't have much in common. End quote. As simple as that.
Yeah.
To me, that really resonated, you know? Like I've always had sort of a tense relationship with my family for various reasons. And I've never been able to quite put into words exactly how I feel about that relationship until I read this line. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's as simple as that. I love them. They love me. We just don't have a lot in common. We're just different people.
Right.
But that's still okay. Like, this is not like some condemnation of Dex's family. Dex's father
Not at all.
wrote them a beautiful note earlier in this story.
Right.
They can still love each other. They just aren't the same people and don't live the same lifestyles.
Yeah.
And Dex clearly just never fit in with whatever their family was doing. So that's okay. You know?
That's okay. You can still have love and acceptance between one another, and that can be enough. That can be wonderful.
That can be wonderful, you know? And I think like that's something anyone who's ever had like strict parents or ultra religious parents or,
Totally.
you know, we all have our own little family squabbles, but
Yes.
this is an idea that I think is just so core is like,
Absolutely.
you can still love family even if you're entirely different people.
Totally.
And I found that really beautiful. Just another idea in this story that resonated with me. I'll wrap up my thoughts by saying I was completely satisfied by the end of this book. I thought we went on a complete journey with Dex and with Moscap, a small-scale journey. We got to the Hermitage, and we decided to go on a new adventure together. That, to me, felt like a nice loop that closed itself. I wasn't left with any cliffhangers that were frustrating. I will say, though, just being the sort of sci-fi reader that I am, I do want more of this universe, and I want more answers to stuff. In particular, I have some lingering questions about the world building, especially around the robots and around robot culture, which I think if I did have a criticism, which, you know, the criticism is too hard a word, but I feel like robot culture took a bit of a backseat. This was really Dex's journey to the Hermitage, right?
Right.
I wanted to learn more about Moscap, where Moscap comes from, and Moscap's life
the end of
and
the
robot
age.
culture, the factory age. I want to learn about what happened pre-transition, as we keep hinting at. I felt like Moscap in the story was mostly used as a sounding board for Dex, which again is fine. This is Dex's journey. Dex is our main character. But we didn't get to know Moscap as much as I would have liked if I had one criticism.
Fair enough.
But the end of the book, for what it's worth, clearly sets up a sequel. in which it seems like we will be exploring more of these things. We're headed back into human territory, which will inevitably result in conversations about robot-human relationships and the history between them. So kind of digging into the things that I'm left lingering with. And so here's a hot take, Opsa. For once in my life, I think I'm going to be reading the sequel.
He's going to read the sequel?
It's happening!
Folks, for the first and maybe only time ever. That says quite a lot about this book that Becky Chambers put together here.
So, yes, I loved it, and I actually can't wait to dig into the sequel as well.
I'm so excited for you. I will maybe pivot back to the minor criticism I had, and I want to hear really this. Quite slight here, but for me it was similarly around the myth building, but in my case it was around the mythos of the parent gods and the child gods, and Bosch and Trikili and Samaphar, etc. I just personally didn't find that it added much to the story for me, and one thing we didn't talk about last episode was that pretty cryptic and strange excerpt that prefaces the book about the ecologians and the cosmites and the question of robot consciousness.
Yes.
I was pretty floored by that, and I really expected it to tie into the story a bit more than it seemed to. And I thought I'd get a little bit more purposeful world building around that, which again wasn't really the case, and doesn't, I can't call it a major criticism by any means. And ultimately, I walk away with really a wonderful impression of this book and the message, which I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about in the next segment here, and I'm sure you've got many thoughts on it too. But again, just the way that Moscap, which AKA Becky Chambers, reassures us that we are allowed to just live without a need to justify that or earn it, is something that we could all use reminding of. And I found this book did truly a lovely, delightful job of communicating that.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't disagree with your critique of the gods and their utility in this story as well. Yeah. I did think they'd be more central, or at least the idea of religion and robot consciousness and that debate from that excerpt at the top of the book would be more central.
Right.
And it wasn't, which is why I too am kind of left lingering with questions about what happened 200 years ago. What's going on with the robots? All right. Well, that's the summary. Those are our impressions and thoughts of the book. Let's take a quick breather, Obsa. Let's refill our water tanks with some gross algae-filled creek water.
Only the finest.
Only the finest. We'll be right back, folks, because up next, we got to talk about some themes and ideas and dig a little bit deeper in our sci-fi analysis. So we will see you in a minute.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap. Ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
All right, welcome back, listeners. And now we'd love to just jump into our sci-fi analysis. Abu, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So for my takeaway, I wanted to take a few minutes to explore this central idea in the book about finding the strength to do both. A core belief, not just for Dex, but seemingly for most Penguin citizens as well. So we first come across this idea early in the book when Dex receives their socialist, leftist, utopian state ox bike for free, seemingly. Quote, all of the sacred Sixes symbols were painted on the wagon's back end, along with a paraphrased snippet from the Insights, a phrase any pagan would understand. Find the strength to do both. End quote. So that's where we first come across the phrase. And then again, in today's reading, in today's chapters, Moscap asks about that painted quote, and Dex recites from their faith, from these insights. Quote, without constructs, you will unravel few mysteries. Without knowledge of the mysteries, your constructs will fail. These pursuits are what make us, but without comfort, you will lack the strength to sustain either. End quote.
Yeah,
Whoa!
that is. I love that. Really, really.
This is
love
big.
that.
I feel like you and I have talked about this over the years of our friendship
Yeah.
a lot.
Definitely.
Just because of the sort of the type of people we are.
Yeah.
I have not been shy about being sort of a type A workaholic. I'm a child of very strict immigrant parents. Like, it's in my DNA to value myself based on my work, my achievements, the recognition that I receive.
Totally.
And the idea of relaxing, the idea of doing nothing,
Resting.
that's a dirty word. You know, like, that's wasted time.
You can rest when you're dead.
You can rest when you're dead. You can rest when you're quote unquote successful enough.
Right.
And I don't think I'm alone in this. I think this is a feeling that many of us living under the heel of capitalism basically can relate to, right?
More socialism.
I know. We're becoming such a socialist podcast. So I think this is a feeling that many folks feel. And here is Dex saying that while our works, our passions, our achievements, like, those are all important things. Those things do make us who we are. But none of that happens without fuel to the fire. Comfort is the fuel that gives you the strength to pursue those things, to pursue your work, your passions, and your goals, and to achieve things. Both actually are equally important and, in fact, intrinsically linked. One cannot happen without the other.
Right.
And I found this next passage beautiful. Dex explains further to Moscap, quote, I thought, wow, a cup of tea may not be the most important thing in the world, or a steam bath, or a pretty garden. They're so superfluous in the grand scheme of things. But the people who did actually important work, building, feeding, teaching, healing, they all came to the shrine. It was the little nudge that helped important things get done. End quote.
Yeah. Dex, I will say you're minimizing your work a little bit here.
Yeah, that's true.
Still struggles a little bit with understanding the equal validity of the work that they do, sustaining the comfort and just rest that gives fuel to the great work, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful idea, and you're absolutely spot on. Dex here kind of minimizing their own work. It's the little nudge that pushes them to do the real work.
Right.
Not recognizing that, no, Dex, you are also doing the real work. The work of comfort and relaxation is just as important. And man, stepping back from this idea, like, I think this is such a beautifully holistic way to look at life. Recognizing that leisure and rest are just as important as work and productivity. And it makes me think a lot about, for example, I don't know if you know what the FIRE trend is.
Oh, do I?
I believe it stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. FIRE,
That's right.
FIRE.
Yeah.
There's also the overemployment trend. This I think you are familiar with.
Absolutely.
But this kind of gained traction over the pandemic as a lot of jobs moved remote. But the idea that, like, it's easy to work multiple jobs and none of your employers need to know if you're just working from home. That's kind of the simplistic explanation of the overemployment trend. The FIRE trend is kind of self-explanatory. It's this very aggressive kind of budgeting and investing where you try to save like 50 to 70% of your income for years and years and years so that you can retire early, retire in your late 30s, early 40s, because you've racked up so much money at that point by basically starving yourself of life's pleasures and only saving.
No rest necessary.
And no rest necessary. And you can kind of sense where I'm going with that. I think trends like this completely miss the point of what Dex is trying to get at here. Right. This balance between work and rest and valuing both equally. These are extreme measures taken in some like misguided attempts to like fast track happiness or wealth or freedom from work, you know?
Right.
And I think actually the reality is, based on the research I was doing for today, there were numerous articles about people who like committed to the FIRE method or committed to early retirement and then got to early retirement and were like regretting doing it. And they actually ended up quite unhappy and realizing they were unhappy on both sides of that equation. They were unhappy when they were aggressively saving 70% of the money they made. Once they were able to achieve that somehow, now they have like nothing to do with all this money and they're retired early and quite unhappy with where their life has ended up.
Especially since all their friends and family are not in the same boat. So they're just on their own, lonely and rich, you know, via this get rich quick or, you know, get happy quick scheme.
That
doesn't pan out.
That doesn't pan out. There's no balance there. There's no respect for both sides of the equation. Work is important, rest is important, and you do them in balance. So count me as skeptical when it comes to these like retire quick, get rich quick schemes that are quite trendy on the internet these days. I do want to say it's not just the trend's fault, right? It's not just people's fault for wanting this. This is a societal problem as well. Totally. I want to acknowledge that. Trends like this are a response to our awful like corporate work culture we're all trapped in.
Totally.
None of us want to be here living life in this way. And so we try to find ways to get the fuck out. And that's kind of where these trends come from. So I want to acknowledge this is a larger problem than just like one influencer telling you how to save money on the internet.
Totally. It's interesting too, because I think balance does require elements of both things. And it's really beautifully captured in that quote from the Insights. But it's interesting when you reflect on, you know, there's that popular kind of Gen Z meme of I don't dream of work.
Oh, yes. Right. What's your dream job? And I think the response is, darling, I have no dream job. I do not dream of labor.
That's right. Which I do love.
It's hilarious.
You know, and it's hilarious. But I think it does miss the mark a little bit in that work is necessary. I mean, it is fulfilling and it's finding balance. It's not overextending in either direction. Too much rest is also
bad.
It's terrible. I mean, you kind of end up miserable and bored, honestly.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Upsir. Work, I think, is like intrinsically part of the human condition. And not necessarily, you know, work is a broad term. Not necessarily work as we define it.
No, precisely.
As like the 40-hour work week in a corporate chair, blah, 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 blah. You know,
right.
Work as in like completing tasks that fulfill you and also provide for your community and society.
Which is why we are recording this on a Sunday afternoon.
Right. I could be relaxing right now.
But work does sustain. And I think, you know, sometimes you can have kind of a dirty, you know, that word can kind of feel dirty sometimes. Yeah. But the truth is that, you know, the work can sustain you and can sustain the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to wrap up my takeaway by also sort of acknowledging the big picture societal level, right? No real world country has been able to achieve a balance of work and life quite like Panga, clearly. You know, clearly this is a utopia. But I would argue that perhaps the famously happy Nordic countries have embraced it best,
perhaps,
or have at least been reaching for this utopia in a way that's, I would say, a little more progressive than other countries. And I do think more and more countries and corporations will have to start considering this balance for like capitalistic reasons. To be better countries and more productive companies, they will have to offer better work-life balance. I actually looked up a research study. This is an annual study that this recruitment company called Randstad does about the world of work. They just like sort of study work culture around the world. and they do these annual studies. And they found this year, for the first time in the 22-year history of this company doing this annual review, that work-life balance has topped pay as the number one priority for workers.
Interesting.
The number one thing that workers are looking for from their job is now work-life balance and not more money. Money has been the number one thing for 22 years until this year.
That's so interesting. And I will say, that feels true to my own experience. Like when having opportunities for greater, income, have certainly taken them.
Certainly. For sure.
Turn it down by any means. But there has always been the question of, I have in fact turned down at least one promotion with the understanding that it would mean, yes, a little bit more money, but also a lot more work.
Yes.
And I want more balance than I do just accumulating, credits in a bank account somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly feel the same. And I think we're both lucky enough in our careers to be in a place where we can start to make that choice. We can say no to a promotion because we already make a comfortable amount of, income for our own lifestyles and our families and stuff. Obviously, there's conversations to be had of like, there are too many people not making that minimum and can barely survive and have no choice but to live an imbalanced life just to survive. Comforts be damned.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a long way to go into achieving that. But I found this data really interesting, that the dynamic has shifted and that work-life balance has now topped the charts in this 22-year study, this 22-year annual study for the first time. So to wrap up my takeaway, I want to say that I think we should all be aspiring to be more like Penga in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think we all should be out here trying to find the strength to do both, or at least do our best to do so.
Beautiful takeaway. Yeah, I really love that you captured this pretty central theme and message in the book, and one that we absolutely all should take to heart. You know, because we're all going back to work tomorrow. So.
I got the Sunday scaries. I don't know about
you. So try to find the strength to do both.
Exactly. All right. What about you? What's your big thematic takeaway from today's reading?
Yeah. So my takeaway is around, shockingly, philosophical framework that's kind of hinted at in these chapters.
Love it.
No way we were going to get away from that one.
No way.
And in this case, it's post-humanism. And it's funny that I actually stumbled on that term while reading a thoroughly unrelated Atlantic article about the game Civilization. But in any case, before I go any further, I'm really curious. What does that phrase post-humanism evoke for you, Abu?
For me, post-humanism makes me think AI, makes me think robotics. Certainly. It makes me think, what are the frameworks and ideas and philosophies and religions that define a world in which we are creating life that is post-human, beyond just human life?
Totally.
Where consciousness exists in the world that isn't just humanity, I guess.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's more or less where my brain also went, and it felt kind of uncomfortable, to be honest. This notion that we're in a post-human world, like, I don't know about that, And I think generally, humanism brings to mind concepts like equality and progress and human rights and human dignity, and so post-humanism seems like a pretty terrible thing. And in any case, so, I've long considered myself a humanist, and the general, objective there is maximizing human flourishing and happiness. And I feel like this book, in a sense, captures a lot of the ideals of humanism. And it's also, at least for me, partially why I'm not a vegetarian. I tend to subscribe to the notion that, yes, we're all animals. at the end of the day. And animals hunt and kill for their survival. So we're justified in the same. So the most profound takeaway I've gotten from A Psalm for the Wild-Built, and especially in these chapters, is a bit of a challenge to that reductive, human-centered mindset. It really touches on the core of posthumanism. So the book, rather than upholding humanity's mastery over nature, which is, the typical sci-fi trope,
Yeah.
instead suggests that advancement really comes from actually embracing our place within it. So rather than touting human exceptionalism by painting this portrait of a spacefaring civilization that continues to exploit its planet's resources and that has conquered the laws of physics and grows unbounded, we instead have a civilization that is trying to counterbalance its own instincts, to find balance with the greater ecology. And we, of course,
that paradox
touched on that.
again.
There is that paradox. And I like the way that Dex describes it. Quote, "The paradox is that the ecosystem as a whole needs its participants to act with restraint in order to avoid collapse, but the participants themselves have no inbuilt mechanism to encourage such behavior."
Yeah.
So what's, I think, further interesting is that Dex's internal turmoil around their purpose and Muscap's really brilliant response to it suggests that, Dex perhaps still has a little ways to go on the personal level, that the demand for special purpose or meaning for our lives may, in fact, be some of the cause for our psychological misery.
Yeah.
But posthumanism, and especially how it's captured in this book, suggests that, it doesn't diminish who we are to embrace our equality with the non-human in our ecosystems. And by embracing that non-specialness, we may find ourselves on the path to liberation. By decentralizing humans from the narrative, we might just be able to heal the damage we've done to Earth and ourselves. By having a much more balanced take on the role that humans and nature play and the counterplay between those two, we can perhaps transcend this sense that, well, we humans are special and different, and what we do is appropriate. It's okay for us to exploit the resources of this planet because human flourishing is the most important thing. Well, posthumanism would critique that and say that is exactly why we have ravaged the planet,
Right?
Because we have so centralized humans in our ethical frameworks and our personal understandings. It's only really by stepping back and having a much more holistic view of the world and our place in it, and taking humans off the pedestal, perhaps, that we can appreciate that all life on this planet has worth, and the non-human also has worth. The soil and the earth that we find ourselves on. Perhaps there is not a world where we suddenly are living in these tree houses that are suspended above the forest floor. but it's important, I think, to maybe think of humans as not different than nature, but as part of it, and to maybe even embrace this kind of post-humanist philosophy. We can perhaps recalibrate our approach to how we live on this planet.
Yeah. The theme of ecology is very much at the center of this book, for sure, right? We talked about that at length, but that's a great takeaway, Obsa. I think you're absolutely spot on. And it's certainly, speaking of, sci-fi and learning a bit about ourselves along the way, perhaps, it certainly makes me kind of rethink a lot of things as well. It makes me think about humanity's place on Earth and within the environment, and this paradox of finding ways to restrain our own instincts.
Yeah.
Of more. And realizing, again, speaking of work-life balance, there is like sort of a human nature balance here within posthumanism.
Right.
And respecting both sides of that.
Yeah.
And I think humanity certainly falls in the extreme of human first, nature second.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea. And it ties so well together. It's almost like we scripted and planned that, but I swear we didn't. That just that happened by accident, dear listener.
That's what's honestly pretty great about these episodes is we do land on these conclusions that dovetail quite nicely.
Yeah, that's a beautiful takeaway. All right, well, before we give our final ratings, I know people are waiting with bated breath. Before we give our final ratings to this book and close out our discussion, let's share some listener thoughts, because we had some lovely thoughts from our community as well.
That's right. We'll start with Alex from Discord. Quote, "When I started this book, I don't think there was anything from any book I've read that I wish was real more than a tea mug."
Oh my God. Same.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Spot on, Alex.
Yeah. What do you think what is the closest thing to a tea mug that we have? A therapist, I suppose.
I guess a therapist.
Therapy without the tea. But I would, note to my therapist if she's listening. I would love for you to brew me some tea during our sessions.
Yeah, some of that wild thyme tea.
Okay, next up we have a comment from Dan in Discord. Dan wrote, quote, "I found so many scenes in this book so easy to imagine and become immersed in," end quote.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the tree houses of Inkthorn, I just can't get away from that concept. It's the one that just visually has stuck with me the most.
Yeah. In a good way or in like a way that confounds you?
In the best of ways.
Oh, okay.
No, in the best of ways. I never had a treehouse, growing up.
Yeah, me neither.
It seemed so cool.
I know. Did you ever read those like Magic Treehouse books or whatever?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to just have a city full of treehouse dwelling people is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And we also have another comment from Discord. White Taiga says, "Truly amazing pieces of work and thoroughly enjoyable from beginning to end. I've been recommending to everyone as they're both essentially novella length and easy reads."
Yeah. And White Taiga is talking about both the sequel as well.
That's right.
Which they read and which I intend on reading. And this, I was already planning on reading it, but White Taiga's comment certainly cements it for me.
Yeah.
That I need to check out the sequel. I too have been strongly and aggressively, as I said last episode, recommending this to everyone and anyone who will listen.
Just shoving it down their throats, huh?
That's right. I keep bringing it up in work meetings, and they're like, "Boo, come on, man, we gotta get to the work."
Who is Moscap? Is he on this Zoom?
Oh man, thank you so much to everyone who pops into that Discord, who checks out our Patreon, who leaves comments on Spotify, on YouTube, wherever. Email us. We love your comments, and this is exactly the type of community that we want to build around this podcast. Book readers, sci-fi lovers, and folks who are excited to dive into books like this.
That's right. All right. I think it's time.
The time
Final review.
Uh-oh.
Abu, what would you rate this book?
Okay. This will come as no surprise, folks. Come on. I'm going to rate this book 5 cups of piping hot tea.
Oh my God.
Out of 5.
There we have it.
The highest rating I've given to a book so far on the podcast, to be clear.
That's absolutely correct.
I think the next closest one for me was 3 Body Problem, which I think I gave like 4 or 4.5. So yeah, no, this to me, again, like I said, this burrowed its way into my soul, into my heart, and I think it will live there for a very, very, very long time. This was a special book for me. What about you?
Okay, so super long preface.
Here we go. Your infamously iconic rating systems. Let's hear it.
All right, so I'll start by saying I am not a genre purist by any means, but I do, when I pick up sci-fi, I am looking for something pretty specific, and I found that this book was not exactly that, and in absolutely the most delightful of ways. As we said early on, this book touches on really big ideas and ones that we don't frequently get in this genre. That said, I do want my brain simulated in certain ways, and I think part of that is reveling in the technologies or the cultures of the future. Whether that's utopian or dystopian or neither, I really want to feel immersed in a different world or time. that, perhaps sheds light on our own. And for me, this book is a wonderful and philosophically enjoyable read of these two deeply individual beings whose shared journey and mutual camaraderie I really loved. I also really, really loved the touching and poignant language and message of the book, which, I broadly interpret through Moscap's articulation. It is enough to exist in this world and marvel at it. Where the book falls just a little short for me is in sketching out enough of a world to really spark my imagination outside the pages. Granted, this is a novella, 8 chapters, it's quite short, and there's, of course, a second book that continues the story, but I will admit that I don't necessarily find myself as invested in the second book and in the rest of the world surrounding Dex and Moscap.
Yeah.
I found for me that it's really more this stunning and lovely character portrait of the two of them. And I think without too many edits, this book could live on a few different shelves or even aisles at the library or bookstore.
Yeah.
So in any case, lovely book and one I'd absolutely recommend to a lot of people, sci-fi fans and otherwise. But I think for me, this book lands at 3 triangles for Grylam out of 5.
Not bad.
Which is not bad. And
3 is still a great rating.
It absolutely is. And I will say my scale goes from good to great. So 3 is not a neutral.
This is neither here nor there, but we should do a bonus episode one of these weeks where we talk about what we consider a 5-point scale, because I feel like it's vastly different.
A 1 would probably still land as a good book for me, which is
wild,
problematic.
Crazy. 1 would be like a book I never even bothered finishing. I think we are
hilarious.
That's funny. We should definitely talk about. I think ratings in general are just like kind of silly, but it is fun to kind of talk about it in that way.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, folks. That's a Song for the Wild build. That concludes our journey to this hermitage of this book. We will be picking up and starting a new book next on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
We will begin reading Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton in preparation and alongside the upcoming Bong Joon-ho film starring Robert Pattinson titled Mickey 17. So grab yourself a copy of that book, get a hold in at the library. That's what we're reading next. And for the next episode, you're going to want to read the first 6 chapters of Mickey 7. Of course, if you always want to stay on top of the reading, know what the assignments are, due dates are, what books we're reading, when the episodes come out, all that good stuff, you can find the schedule for the entire season in the show notes of every single episode.
That's right.
Definitely check that out and make sure you've completed your homework. Sorry to give you homework.
I'm pretty excited about it, though.
I am
Sometimes the work is important. It's
right.
valuable.
That's
have
right.
the strength.
Have the strength to do both. Okay. Have the strength to read the first 6 chapters of Mickey 7.
That's right. And then take a break.
That's right. Do both.
Perhaps have some tea. Well, friends, the paradox is that this podcast as a whole needs its listeners to act with restraint in order to avoid cancellation. So help us maintain our ecosystem's natural balance and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yes, and be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, you are allowed to just live. That is all most animals and podcasters do.